You know, it's interesting because Hippocrates, the father of all medicine, talked about food as our medicine. And that idea is now coming up really because the science is coming up. It's interesting you talk about, the pre-med requirements. Yeah, like we just get loaded on with heavy duty science. We got to get that under our belt in order to be able to get into school. And even in med school, I can tell you in residency training, everything else beyond that, nutrition's always been considered kind of like the lightweight subject and the one we don't have enough time for. And at the same, and the truth of the matter is it's a subject we cannot not have. It is the subject that is the foundation of understanding our health. And if you don't understand health, really, you can't understand disease. I'm sure all of your listeners think about health really as the absence of disease. You're not sick, you're healthy, right? Like that's the typical thing. You go for a checkup, you get the pat on the back, and you go like, man, I got out of that one lucky this time, right? That's what most people think. But we now know that health is a lot more than that. Good health is actually the result of our body's natural health defense systems that are hardwired inside us. And they protect us, these defenses, from the time we're born to our very last breath. When we get sick, it's usually because one or more of these health defense systems actually failed us or they're getting weaker. And so that's really what got me interested in what is defining health itself. So we found 5 systems. There's probably more than that, but in my book, I write about 5 core foundational systems. First one is angiogenesis. So that's what I do. Angiogenesis is how the body grows blood vessels. Blood vessels are our circulation. That brings oxygen and nutrients to every single cell in our body. So it's a powerful way of nourishing, replenishing, and feeding our system. If our blood vessels aren't healthy, we're not healthy. So that's actually a powerful system that, guess what, can be boosted by foods. Even though the biotech world has been working on drugs to manipulate the system, turns out Mother Nature's beat them to the punch by already creating lots of foods that can do it.
So I got a question. You map it out.
Yeah.
How much of these pathways, when we're talking about these blood vessels, how much do we have in our bodies?
Right. So it's amazing, how many blood vessels we have. 60,000 miles worth of blood vessels packed inside our skin. That's enough that if you were to pull them out end to end and line them up, that would encircle the earth twice. So really a lot of real estate there to help feed our body.
Yes. So there's a couple of things that related, and it really just set the light bulb off in my mind about this, because angiogenesis is related to normal things like wound healing and childbirth. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because there's also a potential dark side to it.
So like almost everything else in life, there's sort of 2 sides to the coin. Normal angiogenesis feeds everything, but the way that we've evolved as humans is if we cut ourselves, our body knows that. Our defense system springs into action, figures out where the injury is, and starts growing blood vessels to heal it up. In fact, if you ever had a scab, scraped your knee, had a scab, that scab comes off a little too early, that bright red stuff underneath it, that's angiogenesis, new blood vessels growing to feed and heal that wound. So really, really important. But then when you're done healing, the body kind of turns it all down and right sizes it back to where it needs to be. For childbirth, every month, a woman who is of reproductive age grows a lining in her uterus called the endometrium, and that's what gets sloughed off during menstruation, and then it gets built right back up so that if there's a sperm that meets the egg, it has a nice nest, blood vessel nest to implant in so it can actually grow. So, and when the baby grows, you got the placenta and you've got the actual organs forming, that requires angiogenesis yet again. So we can't get away from angiogenesis. It is very much part of who we are. But as you point out, there's a dark side to it because diseases can hijack this process and feed themselves. And the best example of this is cancer. Cancers form all the time in our bodies, but they're completely harmless. They don't cause disease because normally they don't have a blood supply. So they can grow maybe 2 millimeters in diameter. It's about the size of the tip of a ballpoint pen. Then that's it. They're frozen until your immune system spots them and wipes them out. But if they're able to actually survive long enough and release these natural chemicals, these proteins that are fertilizers that draw blood vessels, hijack the blood vessels to feed themselves, they can explode in size. In fact, once blood vessels reach a tumor, it'll grow 16,000 times in just a couple of weeks. So really deadly force. So harmless cancer, no blood vessels. Deadly cancer, filled with blood vessels. And that's why we're very interested, and that's what I gave my TED Talk on, is what are some foods that can actually cut off the blood supply feeding cancers?
Oh my goodness. And I want to dive in and talk about some of them now, because I mentioned earlier, turmeric is one of those that has this anti-angiogenesis properties to it. But you highlight so many in the book. It's just so mind-blowing.
Well, I'm very impressed that you know the mechanisms of turmeric, and also that you understand that black pepper and piperine actually work together to elevate those levels in the body. That's a pretty sophisticated concept, and not everybody knows it, so I'm glad you're getting the word out. But turmeric's one of the anti-angiogenic spices. There are other spices as well, but in my book, Eat to Beat Disease, I wanted to really help clear up confusion with science. And so there's probably no more confusing food than soy, right?
Yeah.
Women are being told everywhere that if they want to avoid breast cancer, they got to avoid soy. And so I addressed this in my book. What's the real truth? What's the science? Well, it turns out that soy is packed with a natural anti-angiogenic, cancer-starving substance. It's got, here's a little background about soy, the controversy. Soy's gotten a scary reputation because some people believe that the plant-based estrogen that's in soy can cause breast cancer. Well, we know that human estrogen can cause breast cancer, but it turns out, science tells us, plant estrogens are nothing like human estrogens, and in fact, they can counter their effects. How do we know this? Well, I write about a study of 5,000 women who have breast cancer, most vulnerable population, and this study showed that women with breast cancer, those who ate more soy, had about a 30% decrease in the risk of mortality, 30% lower. And how does it work? Is that there's a natural chemical called genistein that's in soy that cuts off the blood supply feeding not just breast cancers, but all cancers. How much do you need? The research has found about 10 grams of soy protein a day. That's what you'd find in a cup of soy milk.
That's so fascinating, because for me, and this was about 10, even maybe 12 years ago, when I started to hear, and there was nothing really to solidify this, but these phytoestrogens got lumped in with these xenoestrogens we might find in things like, plastic, bisphenol A or something like that. And we really didn't have this data that we have now to hear that, wait a minute, it's not fitting into those estrogen receptor sites in the human body the same way and causing these problems. Matter of fact, it's supportive. And that's really, really a breath of fresh air.
This is where science leads the way, right? Like, I think when it comes to food and health, it's so confusing to hear about a superfood or a super diet. And, like you hear it's curative one week and then the next week it flip-flops to the other side. If research scientists did that all the time with their medicines, we'd never know what to do. But what scientists do, what really serious doctors do, is we just follow the trail of science. It's like, the headlights shine forward and we just figure out what we're seeing within, in our windshield.
This leads me to asking you about, this is really, really, really interesting. It has anti-angiogenic properties, chicken thigh. Chicken thigh, we got to talk about this.
All right, man. Well, look, I love chicken thighs. I think chicken thighs are the tastiest part of a chicken. But, most people grow up being, kind of brainwashed that you got to have chicken breast, right? By the way, real chickens in the wild, their breasts are like this thin. I mean, these chickens in the wild are like, they're not buff like you see a farm chicken.
They don't have the augmentation.
They don't have that augmentation. That's right. So, but chicken thighs actually are the dark meat, right? So dark meat's getting the exercise, and it turns out the chicken thighs accumulate a natural vitamin called vitamin K2. And, similar to other vitamins, they actually add something to the body. So in the case of vitamin K2, it's anti-angiogenic, and it actually cuts off the blood supply to tumors. And so there's, public health studies showing that people who eat diets containing vitamin K2, and chicken thighs is a great source of it, actually have lower risk of certain types of cancer.
Really, really remarkable. And again, you cite so many different interesting studies here in the book regarding this. And even with, you say here, quote, people who ate more K2 containing foods had more than 57% reduction in the chance of dying from heart disease. Really, really powerful stuff. So these nutrients don't just do one thing. And that's another thing that you share throughout the book.
That's right. Although, in the in the public domain, people tend to really simplify things into a message, like this compound does that, and that's all it does. In reality, Mother Nature is incredibly resourceful. So she generally gave lots of job descriptions to almost anything that's found in our food. And so this is why we need more research. But already we're beginning to learn the kinds of things that are present in food and how they act in the body.